Roughly 80% of experiments fail. The fear of failure holds a lot of people back. We're not taught as humans to fail a lot.
Companies need to understand that failure is a good thing in experimentation. What do you find that you do to help them kind of embrace failure?
I think for organizations,
Today, we're going to be talking to Nguyen, a principal consultant here with Smart Panda Labs and someone who spent a lot of her career focused on analytics and experimentation at the likes of the Walt Disney World Company. Today, we'll be talking to Tu about experimentation overall and how that aligns with business objectives. We'll also be talking to her about getting teams aligned with experimentation, marketing, product, and IT, and making sure all those teams are finding value in the experimentation program. The importance of frameworks is going to be a part of our discussion, as well as how AI can be leveraged to speed up experimentation moving forward. We're excited. Let's get started. Tu, we are so excited to have you on the episode today. I'm happy to be able to talk a bit deeper about experimentation today. We know that's just a critical part of the post-click experience, and being able to have you on to talk about that is really something we're excited about. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and share my thoughts with you and with the world and whoever's listening.
So I know you've obviously had some great experience across your career when it comes to experimentation, working on the SaaS side, working for an actual platform that can deliver feature flags and experimentation, working on the actual kind of corporate enterprise side at places like Disney and helping run their experimentation program. So what's great is you've kind of seen both sides of the coin, right? Both from the perspective of the tool that's delivering the capabilities, but also from the actual company that's trying to use experimentation to solve problems, to learn, and to grow. And through all that, I know a lot of what you talked about is kind of this framework for experimentation that's been super important to you, focusing on things like leadership, program management, process and planning, knowledge and training. But before we kind of dig into that framework, I kind of want to know, when you're trying to help an organization get started with experimentation, or just in general, when an organization's getting started, what do you find to be kind of their biggest struggle?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think for organizations, it's a lot about the culture that you're trying to set up. Because generally with experimentation, a lot of the times you're asking people to do something different or to do something that they're not yet familiar with. So if you don't have strong leadership, if you don't have strong executive buy-in from the get-go, it can get really hard to push things forward because it's a big project. It's not just something that you're trying to do ad hoc. You're asking people to essentially change the way they work and even possibly the way that they think, because a lot of folks aren't used to the possibility of something failing, right? A lot of the times that we launch anything, we're looking to launch it for success, to ship it, let it sail, and hope, not hope for the best, but we are really putting the best out there. With experimentation, it's really, let's see what this resolves for our team. It's possible that this might be something that we shouldn't do. It's possible that this can make us $1 million. It's possible that we may learn that this isn't even the right thing to do for our company in general. And hopefully you're not testing something that risky. But those are some of the big hurdles, I think, to get through. With the leadership part, it's really, you need to get that executive buy-in because they're the ones that are going to help the individuals, the teammates, push through all of the difficult change management aspects of, that experimentation would bring to, the teams and to the companies that are doing those.
That makes a lot of sense. Something you and I have talked about a lot and companies need to understand is that failure is a good thing in experimentation. You actually don't want a large percentage of your experiments to win, to create a winning scenario, right? You want a mix of winners and losers. That way you're actually are actively learning. If you're getting 90% winners, you're not trying very hard, right?
Right. You're gaming it, right? Like you shouldn't be.
Exactly. So I think that's hard for people to understand. As you deal with leadership, what do you find that you do to help them kind of embrace failure, to embrace this learning mentality?
Yeah, I think the fear of failure holds a lot of people back. We're not taught as humans to fail a lot.
Mhm.
For individuals, it doesn't feel good to fail, but we know that roughly 80% of experiments fail. And I think a lot of people see failure and maybe unsuccessful tests as like wasted effort. They're not really thinking about, look, failure actually gives us a lot of learnings and a lot of valuable insights. If we have an experiment that fails, what are we learning from that? So, if the leaders of the organization, if the individuals who are running the test can reframe failure as learning, showcase how these negative results could help prevent costly mistakes, that helps individuals. We also have done a lot of things at the different companies that I worked with and helping other clients that we showcase a lot of failure experiments to help people understand that, hey, within this failed experiment, this is what we learned, right? Even Thomas Edison, before he invented the light bulb, I think he failed, thousands of times. So we wouldn't have that if he didn't, continue forward with that. And what did he learn every time that he, built and designed this new light bulb? So that failure mindset holds a lot of people back, but I think we really have to think about, what are we learning from each and every single test and iteration that we're putting out there.
And that's a good example too. Scientists,
Yeah,
chefs, athletes, right? It's about the misses, it's about the failures, it's about the bad dishes, right? It's those things that kind of say, okay, I need to tweak this, I need to add this, I need to do this a little bit differently. And ultimately, those things add up and end up leading to excellence, which is what you're looking for from experimentation, right? For it to be this learning engine that drives the organization forward in terms of making better decisions, right? Of kind of to figure things out and maximize their resources to lead down the best possible course. So experimentation really isn't the destination, right? It's the journey. It's the means by which to get that destination in
exactly.
an efficient way. So I know that can be a challenge to communicate. So, and I know you have a lot of experience in that.
Yeah.
When you think about trying to now get that experimentation program started, if people are understanding, okay, this is a journey, this is something that we want to use to learn and grow. In order to do that in a way that's beneficial, there has to be some rigor, right? Some process around that people have to use and kind of follow and guide. Um, what have you found to be the key components of process, regardless of company, industry, maturity? Like, what are those key components of process that you find to be really important?
Yeah, and I love, me, and I love process and planning. So I think to start having an experimentation framework is really important. I think this helps teams run the most impactful tests first, right? Everyone says we don't have enough time, we don't have enough resources. So you really got to think what is going to have the most impact on the company in terms of business metrics. And also, what is going to take us the least amount of effort and the least amount of time to do? And that doesn't mean that we're always running those high impact, low effort tests first, but it means that we can see what the big picture is in terms of those high impact tests, as well as maybe a couple of low hanging fruit tests that we can run at the same time so that we always have something running, right? When we think about experimentation, we also think about the term optimization. So when we're thinking about optimization, we're thinking, how many things can I run simultaneously? What can I do with the time and the resources that I have? And maybe while I'm waiting for this big high impact test to finish, which might need all of the traffic that you have on your site, I can also do some of these other small ones that I can run at the same time so that I'm having something on and I'm learning continuously. I think that framework helps teams really think about how to plan. The other thing that is really important is to have a hypothesis framework. So, as we're building teams and as we're teaching individuals to do experimentation, you don't want all types of different hypotheses out there, different ways to think about experimentation. You want to have this framework so that everyone can understand if then and what the expectations are and how to set up those experiments, how to design the experiments in terms of what information is needed. But it also helps all the teams that are going to be involved. And depending on how your teams are set up, if you have a center of excellence or if you have a more decentralized team, then everyone's following those same processes so that it's not like one team is, like we kind of said earlier, gaming the system and just kind of getting things out there.
Yeah, I can see how important that would be in terms of making sure that you're getting those learnings, right? Because you want some process by which things happen, things get documented, and then you're able to then take those learnings and share them, disseminate them across the organization, especially to leadership, like you talked about earlier, but even to other parts of the organization, maybe that may be thinking about experimentation or themselves are engaged in experimentation, right? Because you want to make sure those learnings are flowing consistently, so people feel like, okay, there's value here. I'm constantly learning something, whether it's a win or a loss or whatever the case is. And of course, the more they flow, the more they fuel what's happening, right? They end up adding that that fuel, that kindling, that gas, so to speak, to the fire to help experimentation grow and really take root and start to develop that culture of experimentation, which I know can be a challenge for organizations to really kind of grasp onto and move forward with.
Yeah, exactly. And you kind of hit the nail on the head here with once experimentation gets started and maybe once you have a win out there, people get really excited. And so that's why the prioritization framework's really important because you'll just start getting ideas from everywhere. Everyone will have an opinion. Everyone will want to get into this program. And so having that framework helps prioritize all of those. And then the aspect of sharing the information, sharing that data, having and building a robust repository of learnings and insights is going to help the entire organization. So within experimentation, a big part of it is getting those learnings, those insights out to everybody so that they can also benefit from maybe one team's experiment or understand like, hey, these results might actually lead into something that we may we may want to do for a future product release or a product enhancement. So maybe we don't use the color blue. No one likes blue on our website, and let's just go forward with that. So you want to make sure that everyone can benefit from your team's efforts.
Yeah, and it's funny, you touched on something when you were talking about that, and this really kind of focuses in on the importance of framework as you mentioned it. You start having all these ideas come in, which holds bar, that's a good thing. I mean, we want ideas flowing in, right? But frankly, not every idea is a good idea, right? And a lot of that goes back to that hypothesis framework you talked about. Okay, we're going to do this thing that you're talking about. Like, what's the expected result? And just putting it to that very, very simple filter kind of says, well, okay, you're suggesting this. Like, what do you intend for this to be able to accomplish and do? Because sometimes people don't think about that, right? Sometimes people just kind of throw an idea out there and it's like, well, like, what's the intent? Like, what's happening here? What are we measuring to say whether or not this is successful or not? And if you don't kind of stop and think about that, then it's just like, well, then like, what are we testing? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. And a lot of times we hear, okay, we get the hypothesis, right? If then, because I feel like it or because my boss says so, right? But the because aspect should be tied to a business objective. It should be tied to the team's broader goals or even the company's goals, right? It's something then that drives this test to actually be something that would this be implemented in the long run, or is it just because Shamir likes this color? Or because my boss wants to do X, Y, Z. And so we want to make sure that we're not building experiments that could be biased to anybody's opinion, but it's based off of qualitative insights, pre-analysis that you've done, that this is an experiment that we should even run using heat maps, other data, uh, research, anything like that, that would help guide the initial experiment design to begin with.
Yeah, it's funny. I think about being a kid and I think about doing just like crazy stuff. Like, I'd take orange juice and mix it with Sprite just to like, oh, I wonder what that tastes like. And I think like, why don't I do that anymore? Well, it's like, well, because, it was probably kind of stupid, but I also don't do it because it's like, I'm an adult. I don't have time for that. Right. So it's like, I don't have time to just throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. Right. Like I need to maximize my time. So I think about companies and their resources, right? There's a finite number of resources. Like, how are we making sure that we're using that resource to do something that's going to help us to learn? And that's so important when we have that kind of framework and process in place. But I guess my next question for you is, okay, so you put this framework and process in place, but then stuff happens, right? The market happens, right? There's customer shifts, there's competitive forces. So how do you maintain that process and framework, but at the same time maintain a level of flexibility to be able to adapt to corporate needs, market needs, competitive forces, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, you make a really good point because when you think about, I guess 5 years ago, right, COVID hit, the pandemic changed everything. Our consumer behaviors change, drastically, both online and in physical locations. I think a big part of it is a lot of teams will plan for the quarter, they'll plan for the year. They've got their X number of tickets that they're going to do. These sprints are laid out already. If we have fixed and long-term testing roadmaps, those can get quickly outdated before we even get to the execution part. So for teams to be able to move in, to be ready to move in any direction, to be agile enough to shift as market changes happen, or in any case, you might run an experiment. This is a great example that we had at Disney. We ran an experiment. It didn't go the way that we thought it would. And then our entire strategy for testing on this specific part of the site had to change because of that, right? So we had to iterate very quickly on the rest of that roadmap. We had to change everybody's plans and things like that. I think also having tools to help understand what do the conditions look like here. Things like anomaly detection, things like using feature flags, personalization, even ML capabilities, if they're there in your tools, really help teams be nimble and be flexible. And other things that I've seen companies do, I think, in terms of building for flexibility is, making sure that the infrastructure is set right. That's what I love about feature flags and continuous integration and continuous delivery practices, because it means that you have teams and engineering teams that you're working with to help build these experiments are ready to be nimble. They're able to pull off one branch of code, change that up, put it back in place, and not have to take down the entire site or the entire booking engine because something didn't work as expected. So if teams are using different things like flags and toggles, that really definitely helps those engineering teams. And then the product managers can work with that, knowing what can I test, very nimble, and what do I need a little bit more time with in terms of infrastructure. If it's a platform kind of test or a back end type of test, those may be built very differently than something that's more UI and UX.
There's a couple of things you touched on there. Well, several things you touched on there that we could go on a lot about, but a couple of things I want to isolate. So one thing you mentioned was the example of the test you ran at Disney that didn't turn out the way you thought it was going to turn out. And I think about the importance of following the customer and following the data and where that leads you, because the people may lead you in a different direction than you thought at the beginning. And one thing about testing that's so important, that really is what the power is of experimentation. And if you ignore it, then it becomes self-defeating, is you've got to follow the data, you've got to follow the customer where they take you, not where you want them to go, right? So because that's the case, and because the customer may take you in directions that maybe you didn't predict or you didn't see coming, the quality of the data that you're getting from the customer is important. And I think a large company like Disney, larger companies like Amazon and so forth, that data quality, having that quality off just a little bit can mean, sometimes tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, difference. If your testing and your traffic is maybe low to those companies in the lower side, the impact maybe isn't as huge. But when you're at that level of testing, the degree of confidence you're looking for, that the level and quality of data has to be on point, or else, again, you lose a lot of money very quickly. I mean, you're talking about within minutes or hours of a test running. Not having the right quality is important. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, with experimentation, it's really about robust statistical analysis, right? It's math here. We're not experimenting and just using what I feel to make decisions, or at least I hope not. It's all about math and statistics. So poor data can lead to false positives, misleading results, ultimately bad business decisions. And we've seen that if the data is unreliable, even the best designed experiments can be useless. So as part of that process for launching an experiment, you really should have like an analytics and tracking QA. The things that we would do at Disney and at Split with our customers is to always have tracking and implementation audits. And these things happen. I mean, there were several times while I was at Disney that we actually ran an A/B test. We always would add in additional tracking elements and tracking events in there. And that's because I'm, always a little bit nervous about things. So I like to add in that additional secondary element that I can, helps me understand what's going on. And we actually ended up finding long-term tracking issues that we had to work with our analytics team to help get those fixed. Um, Tools like tag management systems will usually have some sort of an anomaly detection. Anytime that we see something that is, maybe higher or lower than the norm, you kind of got to think Twyman's law, right? If it's too good to be true, it's probably not true. And so you always want to check to make sure, is there something wrong with my implementation? Is the page view firing as expected? Is the test making, we've seen this too, is this test making the control version load slower than the variant version? That happens too. And so those are things that will impact analytics and tracking. And so you always want to do an analytics QA. We always would do that QA as part of our pre-launch process. You want to do things like validate your segmentation. If you're testing using any cohorts or segmentation, does it look equal across the variant and the control? You want to make sure that the bucketing logic ahead of that test too is implemented correctly. So making sure that your engineers and your SDET teams are checking all of that to make sure even milliseconds matters. And even that can completely invalidate the results of a test, and that would be a big bummer because it's, as we know, can be a lot of effort to run some of these tests.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because having those checklists and those checkpoints in the process is really important because it also infuses the human element into it. And that human element's key because you can't just blindly trust what the tool is telling you. I was checking data for a client test that we launched just a day ago, just to make sure the data was flowing in okay. And the tool was telling me, "Oh, you got a winner. You got a winning variation." And it's like, no, that's not true. No, I don't. But I get why it did that. I get it's just doing math, right? And it's just saying, hey, you have a winner, but there's no context to it. They don't know that the client's business cycle is 3 weeks long, and there's no way that you could possibly determine a winner in that. They don't know that I haven't even crossed over a full week or a weekend, right? So there's all these things it doesn't know, and you have to apply that human element to it in order to make sure you're getting the value out of it. So that's where the expertise combines with the technology to end up delivering kind of a winning program, right? That you're doing for clients. Um, One other thing that I know that we've kind of run into as well, and I'm curious to know how you've had to kind of deal with this too, is when you're testing, the experience on the website, that post-click experience, it becomes a myriad of different players right in the room. So you've got the IT, the code, the development, the engineering teams involved, but then you've also got product involved in terms of what they're delivering, what's being sold or positioned on the website. And then you've got marketing involved, right, who are concerned about things like branding, and they're concerned about things like creative, messaging. And we often find that getting those three teams in alignment is what causes a lot of frustration and trouble in organizations in terms of really improving that experience in a meaningful and measurable way. Is that something that you've run into during the course of your career?
Yeah, definitely. I think when you get a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right, it can get really messy and you're running into each other and knives are out and all of that. I think getting everyone on the same page is extremely important, but it's a lot easier said than done. And I think at the end of the day, what experimentation leaders can really do is remind everyone we're all in this for the company's goals, right? We're all in this to increase revenue, to make a better customer experience. So, how do we design an experiment together and ensure everyone's buy-in ahead of an experiment launch to make sure that we are all on this road together? One of the things that we would do at Disney is we would have a strategy review session with the analytics team, with the engineering team, with the design team, with product strategy, with the executives, so that we can really put together, all of the ideas in place, make sure that everyone's concerns were heard and understood. Sometimes there needs to be a level of compromise of certain things, right? Like, okay, maybe marketing doesn't love XYZ, but it's doable within the realm of everything that we're doing. Um, One of the things that we run into a lot is we've got great ideas, but it's going to take a lot of engineering effort to do this type of experiment. Is this something that we want to do? okay, product team, how can we make this less heavy in terms of engineering resources? Can we split this test up into multiple tests? Can we take a certain element out of it, right? Does this thing have to animate or can it be static? Let's test individual strategies instead of throwing everything at one experiment and one test so that we can learn in iterations instead of take months to get something out. um, I think with marketing, a lot of times they feel that they are left out of the picture in terms of experimentation. But I think one of the things that we could be doing as bigger companies is to make sure that marketing has their own set of experiments that we can be running simultaneously, in addition to the UI UX stuff, right? At Disney, we would do a lot of offer messaging type of testing, right? And that aligns exactly with what marketing's trying to figure out. What sounds better to individuals, right? It's not like people are getting different offers. It's just that they sound different. You might be getting a fourth night free, and somebody else might be getting 20% off or something like that. So while it's the same offer, the messaging's different. So marketing's understanding, well, what is it that people, like to see better, or what do they resonate with better? But at the end of the day, making sure that the results uh, are shared with all of those individuals, that the learnings are put together with context. It's not just about what variant wins, but why did it win? What are the things that we learned from this? In addition to variant A being the winner or control being the winner, we learned that a lot of people click here. A lot of people and visitors go back and forth between these two tiles. A lot of people, find that there's an issue with this part of the cart or the checkout funnel. Hey, this is something that we can take to the next step in the next iteration. So it's making sure that every team has some sort of learning as part of the experiment as well, I think really gets people, working together.
Thinking about all that, you've got multiple teams involved, and obviously you want them all aligned. Then you've got multiple tools involved, and you want those tools aligned so that you're able to deliver the test properly. You're able to measure and get the proper data involved, both going in to feed the test, but also coming out to measure the effectiveness of what's happening and make sure that the results are significant. And then on top of that, now we've got AI. Right now, we've got this whole other element that we're now throwing into everything that we're doing, and not just in business, but in personal life. AI is finding its way everywhere. What kind of influence do you see as AI having on the world of experimentation?
Yeah, and we've already seen this. I think for many, many years. I just don't think a lot of people have really paid attention to it. Right? It's the hot word. If you don't hear the word AI in a day, it's a big surprise. I think with experimentation, AI will just truly help the velocity of experiments like exponentially grow. They'll give us, using AI within your tools. If you're building an algorithm or a process yourself, like at your company, looking to do things like having faster learning cycles. AI will impact, I think, the reduced opportunity costs in terms of experimenting as well, because you're moving faster, hopefully with less resources. AI creates a lot of efficiency, but I think, it's important to remember that an individual analyst or an individual experimenter has a lot of context that needs to be brought into that experiment analysis to begin with. Um, I think, a lot of tools for experimentation will help enable multi-arm bandit testing, which will also speed up experimentation, allowing you to experiment and have a bunch of different variations and different things that you're testing at the same time. So things like placement and color, for example, that might have 16 variations. And that is something that, we would do at Disney as well. Is okay, we're going to test something on the homepage on the global nav. Let's test both the messaging and the placement of this individual tile. And we can do this a lot faster instead of doing one test, waiting for those results, and then doing another test, waiting for those results, finding the best of those two winners, and then doing a third test and putting those results together. So instead of doing that very long process, which costs resource and time, we use AI to help us do a multi-arm bandit test, which allowed us to do this within one test and find that winner, saving us a ton of time and money in that regards. And I think, when we think about AI and those tools, helping save time is a big factor in that. And as teams are possibly building their own AI algorithms and processes and systems, like they should be using experimentation to also test those algorithms. Is what I built in AI actually better than, human mode or the default mode? I think a lot of people will find out that surprisingly, it might not be. A lot of consumers respond very differently to things that are AI built than a human built, right? Again, we can lose a lot of human factor into those algorithms, and people recognize it. I can read something and see, ooh, this was written by AI because this does not sound right to me, or it uses too many emojis or too many commas and things like that aren't really
Yeah.
the way that normal humans interact and talk with each other. But I do think that AI has a lot of benefits for the world of experimentation, the world of engineering, because it really does help us be more efficient with our time. So even as an analyst, AI can hopefully find little tidbits of information that you may have missed because you're so busy looking at something else, or you're too busy detecting some other anomaly. AI has other anomaly detection that can help us find issues in real time and much faster than maybe a human would. Um, we think about personalization. Personalization is also built on AI, and it means that we as users on the post-click experience, or what we're experiencing online, is that it's not a one size fits all experience. I could have something when I land on a homepage and let's say I'm shopping. Oh, it realizes I love the color black, so it's recommending a lot of black t-shirts and sweaters to me. It can help enhance that experience for me as the consumer, having things that are recommended to me that I would enjoy instead of seeing things, for kids, for example.
We're talking about AI. We're talking about multi-arm bandits. We've talked a little bit about sample rate mismatch. We've talked about confidence levels, and I don't want to intimidate anyone because experimentation can get really complicated, really involved, really fast. But you don't need that to start, kind of crawling and just walking with experimentation, right? Or at least you don't need to give as much weight or focus on those things as heavily just to get started, right? And if you're just trying to build that culture inside the organization, because there's a maturity curve, right, when it comes to experimentation, and there's a place you have to start. And just like you're not going to give a newborn child steak because they just can't handle it. You also can't say, all right, team, we're going to start experimenting today. So, let's talk about what experimentation involves and start talking about multi-arm bandits and sample rate mismatch. And, people's, eyes are going to glaze over and, nothing's going to happen. So what do you find is helpful in just getting people started? Like, what do you think are just the key things to focus on to help people just get started on that maturity curve and say, okay, let's just get a program up and running and let's just start learning, and then we can refine this along the way.
Yeah, I think the easiest one to get started with is what I would call like an on-off flag or a toggle. This is done with the concept of like risk mitigation. We should measure whether or not this new feature performs as expected or not. And so that in itself, I think a lot of developers and engineers already do this, and they don't realize, technically this is an experiment. This is A versus B. This is on versus off. I have data that I can compare and really see, does this new booking engine look and perform as well as the old booking engine? And that's just the start for it. And I think to get people just in the door, to have that structured process, to have kind of like an ad hoc type experiment, gets them at that beginner level. And then as teams get more comfortable with looking at A versus B data, they can continue forward and do more things like a progressive rollout. Let's launch this at 60% and we'll compare it to the 40%. So slowly roll out that code to production until you get to that 100%, until you're comfortable, because you might find that there are a few little bugs and a few little things that need to be tweaked before we launch this to the full audience. And then you get to the point where maybe all your releases and all of your, product features are released with a feature flag. You're measuring it A versus B to make sure that there's no issues that you need to fix ahead of time. So you're really thinking about feature management in that aspect. And then for individuals who have then become comfortable with experimentation, we see this coming a lot from product managers. And actually, more and more, I'm seeing these ideas come from engineers as well. And I love that because that means that they're going to help, um, you know, spread the good word of experimentation to the rest of the company. But ideation and validation stage where you're thinking, let me validate whether this idea is even worth maybe even putting into production in terms of a product release or a product feature. So we call these, MVPs or like a painted door test. Do people even want to click share my itinerary with people? Let's just see, and we'll put this button to see how many people click it, and we'll, let them know this isn't a fully built feature yet, but wait for more. And then if we see that there's a lot of engagement on it, okay, hey, product team, this is something that our customers want. Let's go and build this thing. And so it gives people a little bit more power because they have the data to prove, hey, this is something that we should do. And then, for more advanced experimenters and teams that have, the number of individuals to help them build this, is we're thinking about that innovation phase, that optimization phase. How do I improve the site? How do I improve what's already done? Can I be optimizing our engineering code, our product, our UX experiences with more of that hypothesis-based testing versus more of just that on-off? And not to say that those on-off flags don't have a hypothesis. Is it better or is it not? But, we're talking about more data-driven, using research, using insights to then drive those hypotheses and ideas for experiments.
Yeah, I think people definitely don't think about the fact that, experimentation, whatever connotation they attach to that, right? They don't think about the fact that the ultimate idea here is this is helping you do your job better, right? You have finite resources on your team. You have a finite amount of time to work. So you want to kind of point those things in the direction that's most likely to lead to a positive result. And if you can test things before actually taking the time to fully flush them out, to fully build them, to roll them out to the entire audience of people who are going to see them online, and you can get answers and feedback to say, you know what, you took 2 steps in this direction before you take 10 or 20. Like the 2 steps are telling you this is a bad direction to go in. Like this is not going to lead you where you want to go. Take 2 steps back and now start in this direction. Okay, this is making more sense. Now we can continue down this path and go there, right? And how much time did that take where you had to go all the way down one direction, come all the way back to right? If you even find out it made things worse because it never got measured, only to have to end up going in the other direction. A lot of testing, especially as you mentioned, a great starting point is just to see how can we make things more cost effective. People often paint experimentation with the paintbrush of revenue generation, and certainly can be, but a lot of it is really about cost reduction, right? It's really about saying how do we maximize our resources? How do we reduce production costs by saying where should or shouldn't we spend our time? What should be prioritized, right? And in that long queue of things that need to happen on the site, how do we better prioritize that with the things that are going to have a bigger impact on the business to drive revenue, to reduce costs, to increase, profitability, those kinds of things. There's so many use cases for the business that, to take us all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, right, starts with leadership. It starts with what matters ultimately to the organization, and saying, okay, if this is where we're trying to go as an organization, if this is what matters to leadership, then how can we then connect those dots and say, okay, how can experimentation be used as a tool, as a mechanism to be able to help us do that, to help leadership achieve what they want to achieve, and ultimately the organization move in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think experimentation, again, is optimization, right? Optimization of time, optimization of resources, optimization of the customer experience. And I think if you can build that into that culture in the beginning where you're setting the expectations that not only am I using this, time to experiment for our customers, I'm also using this to help our internal teams save time on building this thing that I shouldn't be building, or to help optimize the experience. We've seen tests where they have actually saved time for engineering teams because they've been able to help find bugs, or to help them realize, like, hey, there's better ways to put this code out there. We can make these little tweaks here and save our time. Even, when we think about the cost of infrastructure, AWS costs money, right? All these things cost money. How do we make things more efficient? And you can only find that through data. And so how are you going to get that data? It's launching one variant versus another variant. And so a lot of our engineering teams that we've worked with have actually done things like that to help them save money on infrastructure costs, which I know technology teams love to hear right now.
People have been focused on data for the last several years. It's all about data. It's like, well, okay, great. You have all this data. Like, what are you going to do with it? And experimentation allows you to take data, turn it into action, and kind of validate and say, this is what this data means when it comes to actually impacting the business and affecting our customers, or what it doesn't mean when it comes to impacting the business and affecting our customers. And that's what it's about, right? It's ultimately about being able to actually take action and do something that's going to have an impact on the business, an impact on the organization, on their bottom line, on people's bonuses, on people's jobs, right? All those things end up tying into taking action. And experimentation is just the ultimate mechanism to help people to do that.
Absolutely. It's the proof in the pudding.
That's right. Tu, thank you so much for being on the pod today. We really appreciate it. Look forward to having you back soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Shamir, and thank you everyone for listening.